I look at assured autonomy as the ideal, and that's the ideal we've been working toward. Some people would think of it as a goal. I think that we have a lot of goals between here and this ideal of assured autonomy. There's no question that everyone understands now that what we're trying to do in our community is going to require public acceptance. We can see that if we don't execute things correctly, then we set ourselves back because the public has reason to mistrust what we're doing with the technology. So we have to create trust and hence assured autonomy. And autonomy where vehicles are essentially ordering themselves is where we're trying to get to. So that's the ideal. I pulled out my old Earl Nightingale definition of success from the 1950s. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And I asked people in the audience to think about how successful we're being every day in progressing toward that ideal. So long-winded answer, but this is something we're going to be talking about for a long time and getting much more specific about how we define the successful steps along the way.
Well, we're getting to that ideal, and look, I've been walking around the showcase floor. I've been listening to some of the presentations. Absolutely spectacular, by the way. So many amazing people here, companies doing incredible things. We've come such a long way in autonomy, really just in the last couple of years. What would you say are maybe the top 3 use cases you're seeing in the autonomous world right now?
Well, as a recovering economist, I look at where's the economic pull for these technology solutions, because I've also in my career promoted technologies where it was more of a push. And I've discovered that it's easier if there's a pull. In this instance, there's both, because we're advancing some really great technologies. Where we're seeing it the most, I'm just going to stay with the easy economic pulls, is inspections, for example. And so many inspections covers an awful lot of ground, of course. But where we have been so far is being able to do vertical inspections. Now with the progress that we're making on beyond visual line of sight, we're starting to see the ability to do things in a more horizontal environment. And boy, oh boy, is there ever a lot of stuff that needs to be inspected on that basis. Of course, delivery is where we want to be. The beyond visual line of sight delivery of things, and we've had great examples of that, particularly of late, when we had to keep people at a social distance and we needed a more robust supply chain. So deliveries, beyond visual line of sight deliveries included, we're increasingly getting permissions to do those without chase planes, where it really starts to make a great deal of sense. And then I'll shift gears because we're surrounded by public safety people here. We've got a great drone responders event going on. We've been partners with them for a long time. Public safety, I mean, what a great message for our community. We're here to make you safer, and not big surprise that the public safety community has really been embracing this. And whether it's a cop doing an accident inspection in a much shorter duration of time, and not having themselves out on a busy road where there's already a great disruption, to all the way through to being able to go under bridges and do search and rescue out in places that are very, very inhospitable to people. This is a great technology that we're seeing in that respect as well. So that's, I would pick inspections, delivery, and then public safety, and it's in its many, many different forms.
And look, we're all here. We're in separate rooms right now. People are walking around with masks, and it's just so amazing to be able to get together live, in person at this event. I have to thank you, actually, because I have really grown my business in the last year during COVID. All of my colleagues, I've only known them virtually and online until like yesterday, literally. So thank you for what you're doing. And you all are doing an amazing job in all 3 arenas, advocating for the community. let's talk for a second and shift gears a little bit. I mean, we've seen, other progress. You mentioned beyond visual line of sight. So now we've got the BVLOS, right? Advisory rulemaking committee happening. We've seen in COVID drone deliveries really taking off as the ultimate social distancer, as you mentioned. What though would you say are maybe the top three, let's call them, I don't want to say negative, right? Challenges. What are the top three challenges that you see that we still need to overcome to really tap fully into the autonomous systems that we see on your floor here?
Was I going to take that one? Michael's the brains of the operation here.
For sure, AUVSI would be in a lot of trouble.
I mean, we have. I'll just get us started here. I don't know if we can limit ourselves to three.
Three.
But we're up for whatever challenges are coming at us. I'm going to start with mentality. Right? There's a mentality among our policymakers and our regulators that basically says we can't make any changes to the system unless it's really, really justified in doing so. And that's not the mentality of the industry, by the way. We think that we have solutions that will make the airspace even safer than it is today. And I'm not just talking about for small UAS. I'm talking about for all aircraft. And the airspace needs to continue to be upgraded all the time. Technology, in the small, low and slow aircraft that I fly, has been advancing massively, and the ability to do things more safely in an aircraft today is just light years ahead of where I don't have to tell you, you're a former Air Force. So I look at it and I think about mentality as the first thing that we have to overcome in many instances, and we've seen great progress in that regard. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I would just add to that. I think one of the other challenges, but also an opportunity, is the breakthrough of the uncrewed industry and how we're approaching the risk calculation and how that's viewed by the regulator, which has always looked at things through a crewed lens. Aviation obviously has always had a pilot in command until our industry emerged, and to a certain extent, the FAA isn't built for the uncrewed industry. They're certainly working very hard and working very collaboratively with industry to make the necessary changes and to get up to speed. And obviously, the technology is evolving so fast. Don, regulation does not move fast, and often, the technology is outpacing the ability of the regulators to keep up, and the policymakers too, certainly. And when there's only an FAA bill every 3, 4, 5 years, if Congress can stay on time, it's really easy to fall behind. So we spend a lot of time at AUVSI, trying to obviously educate and advocate policymakers and lawmakers. And we do that in a number of ways. Obviously, we maintain very close and active relationships throughout many offices within the FAA. And you were here yesterday morning for the keynote. Brian and Administrator Dixon had a great sit down and great conversation. Brian serves on a number of advisory committees and councils with the administrator.
So I have a badge at the FAA. I feel like I'm working for the FAA.
Wow, that's special.
It's important though, to have that.
You need the access, right? You need to be able to have these frank conversations, and it's great that they're happening.
Absolutely, and just as Brian talked about, how trust is an important part of public perception. Trust is also important between industry and the regulator. And we spend a lot of time and resources maintaining those relationships and working to educate the regulator. At the same time, with lawmakers as well. Obviously, there's a lot of churn on the Hill, and there's a lot of issues that are demanding attention. But like the infrastructure package presents great opportunity for our industry to capitalize on the dollars that will be hopefully made available if the bill actually gets passed for our industry to seize on that and build out, digital infrastructure and other types of infrastructure that'll be necessary for the expansion of our industry. So we try and look at challenges as opportunities.
Yep.
And I think we're doing I think great work.
Well, I love that you're a glass half full kind of guy, because I'm generally a glass half full, half empty kind of gal. And but no, that's the way you need to look at it. Any challenge can be an opportunity. And I think you somewhat answered this next question. Let me back up for a second. You said a word there, Michael. I want to seize on it just for a second. You said uncrewed, and I know that's a movement right now. Across the industry, change some of the gender specific language. Just want to throw the plug out there. Women in Drones is doing some great work. We just put out, my company P3 Tech just put out a diversity, equity, and inclusion survey for the industry. We'll get results to you all soon, but I'm really excited from some of the numbers I saw yesterday of people filling this survey out. I mean, it's a 15-minute survey and people are taking the time, which tells you something. So I look forward to having those continuing conversations with you. And but you also said, you kind of started answering this about some of the other things you do. Advocacy is one. What are some of the other things that AUVSI is doing to help with, bring repeatable and scalable autonomous operations really to full fruition? You talked about the advocacy piece. And obviously this conference is probably a great example as well, right? What else would you say that you all are doing to really help kick the industry up a notch?
Well, let me take that one, and let me take the opportunity to say I'm hoping you will be there. We have this afternoon a really good discussion going on, a workshop on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The initiative that we've launched on that is being headed by Mignon Hollis, who's going to do basically lead that workshop with us. And we're putting together, as we do everything at AUVSI, we're basically putting our, bringing our members together to talk about this, to see how can we be more inclusive as a community. And we know that we've got some work to do here, like all technology communities do. So I'm really eager to see the results of what you're doing. I would say the answer to your question as well, some of the other things that we're doing, although we are an advocacy organization first and foremost, some of the other things that we're doing are largely education based. And you can see from the design of this conference that it's not just our solution providers who are justifiably in love with their technology talking to each other. Right. Although there's plenty of that, and we had plenty of that during our virtual version in May. But primarily what we try and do here is take the users of the technology and have them talk to other users that are interested in the technology and learn from one another. A perfect example of this, we mentioned before, horizontal infrastructure inspection. You've got oil and gas people that do that with pipelines. You've got electricity utility people that do that with high voltage lines, and they can learn from each other and then swap information about what solutions work best, how they break that operation down, what are the different components of the system, what's the state of the art for the technology and the AI, so that they can basically benefit from what's available state of the art. To me, that's the best way to promote, to get us to mainstream with this technology, is to leverage the interest in these vertical industries and the vertical segments, try and get them together and basically learn from one another. That's what we try and do on this platform. That also creates a tremendous amount of goodwill in what we do 365 days a year, 24/7, which is advocacy. If I have to go before Congress, which I do, Michael makes me do as frequently as he can, and talk about things, and he does it a lot more than I do. If we can go up there with the oil and gas industry, with the movie makers, with the people that do construction, with the people that do mining, these are massive industries that are massive employers all over the country. we have that much more credibility. So all of these things they're all in our strategic plan. And I flatter us that we do a really, really good job. And I say we, I don't mean the staff. I mean, we as members and as a community.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned drone responders. I think that's also another perfect example where you had yesterday, Miriam McNabb moderated a panel, from Drone Life, moderated that panel of the SUAS manufacturers with all the law enforcement and public safety and EMS folks out in the audience, and just to hear, that dialogue and people asking questions, really, really awesome. And I agree everything you're saying, Brian, because education is something near and dear to my heart. It's really kind of the core of what I do in my company and why I honestly have this podcast. And I have to say, having been an Air Force member, as you mentioned, former military, your unmanned defense series is spectacular. And what I love about what's on the floor right now is it's not just civilian, civil aircraft and drones and robots. It's military, and everybody's out there together because, having straddled both worlds, I know the significant synergy between those two. And that they're symbiotic, and not one cannot exist without the other. I think AFWorks this morning, Colonel Diller, makes that clear, and all the things they're doing with all the primes and Agility Prime. But to see this in action is really great. So once again, thank you for all of that and for your advocacy. On that note, what would you say maybe is your biggest win this past year so far, in any respect, whether it's advocacy or otherwise?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think for the industry, the remote ID and operations over people rules and operations at night, having those rules published is clearly the biggest win for everybody in the industry, including AUVSI, which was at the forefront of helping to write the rules and then advocating for their release over a number of years. Without those rules, we wouldn't be having a conversation about beyond visual line of sight in a meaningful way. Brian's sitting on the rulemaking committee that you mentioned earlier for beyond visual line of sight. That rulemaking committee would not have been stood up if the remote ID rule had not come out. That was really the linchpin to more scalable, complex operations, as you mentioned earlier. And in fact, as you know, the operations over people and at night rule, that's largely been done for some time, and it kind of just had to sit on a shelf until the remote ID rule was published. And I think that will open up and has already opened up a lot of opportunity for industry to expand and take new types of operations. Obviously open up a lot more airspace and a lot more hours in the day for operations to take place. So clearly the remote ID rule was the biggest win for all of us, and just a huge step forward for the industry, and will enable so much more going forward.
Well, this year definitely started off with a bang with the cluster of those regulations, and I'm hopeful that, as we head into 2022, maybe we'll see maybe an NPRM on beyond visual line of sight or something. I don't know, maybe I'm being too hopeful there, but so what, kind of along those lines, what do you see on the horizon as maybe, let's just say, one of the initiatives you may have in the hopper for us?
Well, I'll start off. We think that, we look at our initiatives a little bit later in the year, particularly from an advocacy point of view. The board of directors is having its September meeting. It's a multi-day meeting where we're going to be looking at some things and things that we've been working on at the staff level. I would say, just keeping it focused on advocacy, that and going back to my earlier comment about changing mentality, we want to telescope things out a little bit when it comes to the way risk gets evaluated. There are some very traditional ways that's been done that have worked very well for traditional aviation, but the discussion is starting to get a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more prominent about how do we take a more holistic view of risk. Michael, I know that's been discussed in the advocacy.
It has, yeah, and there's a lot of focus on this right now. it's certainly a part of the conversation within the rulemaking committee, but also the drone advisory committee, which Brian sits on, stood up a task group 11, to focus specifically on risk calculation as well. AUVSI has a working group on risk, and then the unmanned safety team also is working on risk calculation as well. So I think holistically everybody recognizes that one of the major enablers of again the scalable complex operations beyond visual line of sight will be ensuring that the risk calculation that the FAA uses enables the technology to meet its full potential. And we're certainly not there yet, and we're seeing that with the challenges and with the type certification process and the approval for operations. As a number of companies are going through that process, the lens in which risk is calculated is still not quite right yet. It's still looking at that through that traditional aviation lens, but certainly I think the DAC task group indicates a willingness and an openness to change, and a recognition by the regulator that industry needs to be a big part of that conversation, and largely driving that conversation, because we have the data, we have the ability to prove out the safety case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, balancing safety, security, privacy, and full-scale operations. It's a wicked problem, but it's solvable, right? And so it's great to hear that industry is going to have a voice here, at the table, helping to educate, I think is the word, the buzzword of the day, to let people understand that we can do this maybe in a different way. I think that's going to be really critical. So we talked a lot about all the things you're doing, about this amazing conference you've put on. Do you want to talk a little bit about what else AUVSI brings to the table, and maybe why people should join?
The main thing that people join AUVSI for is networking. It's so much fun for me to walk around the show floor and see people talking to each other booth to booth. And we have very good analytics on the show that demonstrate that half of the value that even the people that are on the show floor get is by talking to other people on the show floor. So it's not just, that we're bringing new customers, and we spend a lot of time developing partnerships with some of the organizations in these other vertical categories to bring new customers to the show, which is fundamentally, this is a trade show as well as a conference. But we try and do networking events in a way that the great diversity that's here from a business perspective is leveraged, and people can find the partners that they need. It's unmanned vehicle systems, and it's a system of systems that we're building now. So the partnerships are really, really the key. And I think I've been in the association world for multiple decades, I'll say it that way. The networking is always what matters most to people. And we are extremely, extremely intentional about the way we put our events together. Even in the virtual environment, we went out of our way to create features that allowed for people to network with one another. Not as successful as coming to an event like this and being face to face, but that's part of what we're all about.
And that's a great transition, maybe to talk for a second or two about what you expect to see in Orlando. So tell us a little bit about that future event that you all are going to host next year. Well,
the first thing I'll say is Orlando is going to come at us at high speed, because
it's not April, right?
We're going to be back. We're going to be back in our usual time slot, and with the blessing, as they say, and so that's a slightly shorter time horizon to plan in. But we're excited about being back in Orlando. I've been and done shows in Orlando, but not with this organization. But the organization has been in Orlando before, like we've been in Atlanta before. And Florida is a very, very progressive state, not just on the air side, but also on automated vehicles. In fact, we have Senator Brandes here from Florida, who's been a real forward leaner and leader down in Florida. So it's going to be a really good venue. It's going to be an exciting time, and I mean, as exciting as it is here, we know that we're going to be building back to the size and the energy. Well, there's plenty of energy here.
There's a lot of energy here.
Even more energy in Orlando. So, and I think the thing that we notice that gets a little bit more prominent each year, even though this is a drone podcast predominantly, is the multi-domain features that we see. There's actually an extraordinary number of maritime companies here. Huntington Ingalls is here, Austral is here, et cetera. And this is the first time we've seen the phenomenon of what we do in the advocacy arena, drawing these large, shipbuilding companies in to actually participate in our trade show. But that also tells you where the market is getting to in that particular domain. So you're going to see, I think, an increasing number of air and ground domain. Ground domain's been around for a long time, but we're starting to now branch into automated freight and things of that nature. So it's going to get more diverse from that standpoint.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we just have maybe 2 minutes left. So in that time, would you like to take an opportunity to make any closing comments before we sign off?
Well, I think the thing that I just want to emphasize for folks is that we do this not because we're in the trade show business. We do this because we're in the membership business. And I use the term community a lot because this community is made up not just of solution providers, but it's made up of companies like Amazon and BNSF and others that are using the technology, but have a very different primary business. And that's part of what makes AUVSI, I think, a unique opportunity. But I never let our people forget about the fact that we're here to serve our members and to make certain that we're creating value for our members and attracting more and more customers for them. So that's the reason why we're doing what we're doing our advocacy, doing the educational components, providing the platforms for people to learn from each other, and taking advantage of nice people like you, Don, who let us participate in your podcast. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. I mean, servant leadership is what it's all about. I've been doing that for a while, and I love that that's your mentality, to use your words, right back at you. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to maybe meeting you on the floor at some point before we head back our separate ways. But until then, thanks everybody. We're out here.
Thanks.